and are grateful to you. Before we start introductions, and I'll begin with this table, I'd like to ask for the stand pray this morning. I won't ask you to do it twice.
I can do it again.
Yeah. No, I don't want to press you. If you've got a prayer a month, I don't want to have you run out. So Berkeley Spencer will ask and give a certain sort of Latin flavor to this experience. Berkeley, would you please? And begin your salad. Here at our table, we have one of our guests of honor and a distinguished guest for this setting, about whom we will say more in a moment, but Brother Alex Morrison, who is with us and was with us in the devotional this morning, and whom we were able to at least briefly acknowledge there. Brother David Kennedy, namesake and patron saint for our center. And we're grateful, Brother Kennedy, not only for your presence today, which we always enjoy, but for all of the genuine excitement that the David M. Kennedy is bringing, the David M. Kennedy Center is bringing to Brigham Young University. And we're delighted anytime you can be on this campus, and especially today. Brother Spencer Palmer, who is in the directorate, the past, present, and future of the center, with Brother Taylor and others as they pursue the matters of the center, and we'll be including Spencer in our activities in just a moment. Sister Colleen Acey, wife of Elder Carlos Acey, and we're delighted, Sister Acey, when you are here with or without your husband. It's wonderful when you're with, but we'll take you without if. But we're delighted to have you on campus, and grateful you could stay today for lunch. And Elder Acey, again, we thank you more publicly for what we've shared privately for that masterful address to young people at an important time in their lives. My wife, Pat, and I'm grateful to her for putting up with the international aspects of our life on these few acres. Jay, I'll invite you to start there, and then we'll just go on through the room.
Dean Robert Matthews, the Dean of Religious Education at BYU, and Professor Lynn Tyler, also from Family Home and Social Science.
Therapy study program, and Mr. Bryce Bassett, who is the administrative assistant to the director.
I'm pleased to introduce Gregory Newell, Assistant Secretary of State.
Dr. Alexander B. Morrison has been in the Canadian Federal Health Department for the past 12 years. He was born in Edmonton, Alberta, graduated and received a master's degree from the University of Alberta, and went to Eastern Canada in 1952, where he worked for the government for a year before attending Cornell University, receiving there a PhD. He worked for a pharmaceutical company in Evansville, Indiana, and received a master's degree in pharmacology from the University of Michigan. Dr. Morrison is the recipient of numerous awards and honors and has extensive experience as a researcher. Dr. Morrison is a 1950 convert to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and is currently serving as a high counselor in the Ottawa, Ontario state. He and his wife Shirley are the parents of 8 sons and daughters. Dr. Morrison has become associated with international health issues as well as local health issues. He has great concern for the health and welfare of children throughout the world and becomes involved with organizations which have like interests. He spent a year in Geneva, Switzerland as consultant to the Director General of the World Health Organization. He is a member of both the Executive Committee and Technical Advisory Committee of the Thrasher Research Fund in Salt Lake City. This foundation sponsors child health research throughout the world. Dr. Morrison has given numerous invited lectures to varied university groups in Canada and the United States and continues to apply his experience and expertise to promote better health for all the peoples of the world. It is with great pleasure that we award you, Dr. Morrison, the first annual David M. Kennedy International Service Award with its attending perquisites. And we'd like to have you just receive that from Brother Palmer and say a word to us before you give more formal remarks this afternoon, if you would.
When you heard President Holland give his opening address at our recent inauguration, you heard him say that the David M. Kennedy Center is established not only to encourage international, diplomatic, political, economic, and institutional linkages, but also to further people-to-people activities, to help spread the values of the gospel in the world at large. As President Holland has just told you, Alex Morrison, partly through his affiliations with the Thrasher Foundation, has been very much involved in third world countries in helping the sick, and the poor, and the people of the earth. And we're grateful to acknowledge that aspect of his contributions as well. On behalf of Dr. Taylor, and all of our coordinators who are here, and the advisory deans, and Brother Ballop, who is kind of our file leader in the International Center, I'm pleased to cite you with the David M. Kennedy International Service Award, hereby presented to Alex B. Morrison for steadfast humanitarian service and for exemplary endeavors in the promotion of Christian ideals among the peoples of the world.
Show them that, Fred.
Money that goes with it. Congratulations. He will be speaking at 2 o'clock this afternoon, and we're hoping that all of you can attend.
Brothers and sisters, I'm honored to be here today on this auspicious occasion amongst these illustrious company. I'm grateful for the generous words that have been spoken. I think I know something of where they came from. And even though I think they were exaggerated in their kindness and puffed up a little bit in their passage through the filter of goodwill and affection, I'm still grateful. I'm especially grateful to receive an honor which bears such a noble name. David M. Kennedy, a distinguished statesman, an ardent advocate for the church, the Lord, a wise counselor to prophets, a distinguished servant of the people of the world. And to have his name on that scroll indicates to me the feebleness of my own efforts, the inadequacy of my own attempts to serve the people of the world. I'm grateful too to President Holland to be on this great campus, an institution which proclaims that the world is our campus, has that kind of international orientation and outlook, can bring a special perspective, solution of the problems of the global village that we all are part of. As I, from my own poor perspective, as I struggle for light to mark the path, it seems to me that there are a few principles which, if we learn them well and apply them wisely, can help to guide us in the way in which we should go in international service. They are neither original nor perhaps new to any of you, but they seem to me to have a kind of special urgency about them that requires that I mention. The first is that despite the great geographic and political and linguistic and social and cultural barriers which separate people, we really are, all of us, whatever our nation, kindred, or tongue, very much alike. And there's a reason for that, which is at the same time both simple and profound. We are all that way because we literally are brothers and sisters in ways which I guess the world would laugh at, but in ways which we have a special kind of understanding of. Because we recognize that as the children of common parents, we have the responsibilities of family relationships. Those are responsibilities which have to be demonstrated and lived in kindness, love, mutual sharing, caring for each other, kind of mutual commitments. second principle, which I believe must activate us in international service, is that one can hardly separate temporal salvation from spiritual salvation. It seems to me that President Brigham Young understood that when he spoke to the saints, gave them instructions on how to deal with the poor, tattered, starving survivors. When he said, in effect, prayer is good, but when baked potatoes and milk are required, prayer will not suffice. It is hard indeed to talk about spiritual things to people whose every thought is, by stark necessity, drifted on the realities of their life, that there is no food for the children, and there is fever loose in the village. It seems to me that much of our success in the coming years in proclaiming the gospel of Christ to the world will come as we reach out to others in a temporal way. We simply cannot separate temporal salvation from spiritual salvation. The problems of the world are immense. They are immense in their size. They are awesome in their diversity, intimidating in their intractability, and yet I think they provide for us great opportunities for service in the Lord's way. As we provide this help, we must always make certain that it is done in the Lord's way, and that's not the way of the world. They must be done in ways, we must provide help in ways which will, at the same time, assist in the development of self-reliance, in handmade self-respect, and will avoid the trap into which many other Christian organizations have fallen, the trap of breeding an unhealthy dependence. We have to do it by teaching the correct principles of the promises, and then letting the people look after themselves. We have a special role to play in this world, and it will be hard for us to do, because we are increasingly required to move into situations to deal with social cultural realities which are beyond our current understanding and beyond our current experience. Much of what we have learned about the outside world in the last 100 years has been the outside world of Northern Europe, a bit now in South and Central America, increasingly into some of the other developed countries of the world, but it is amongst the great masses of mankind in the underdeveloped countries of the third world that we will have our greatest challenges in the next few years. Those challenges are made especially difficult, I think, because it is not possible to separate them into nice, discrete, manageable little packages. Indeed, they are so complexly intertwined that their solution requires a kind of multifaceted rather than unipolar approach. Let me just briefly illustrate the complexity of the problems of the real world by going back in time 140 years to a problem which almost destroyed Ireland. That was the Irish potato famine, called the Great Hunger by one of its chroniclers. When in late July of 1845 the blight came to the Irish potato crop, a crop which the Irish peasantry depended almost exclusively on for sustenance, it was not long before people began to die from famine. A young English doctor sent to Ireland in October of that year wrote back home to his superiors that he expected that in due course pestilence would follow, as it always does in the wake of famine, on the heels of famine. It was not more than a few more months when typhus fever and relapsing fever swept over the Irish countryside, destroyed in combination with famine at least 1 million people, and resulted in a great diaspora to 4 million Irish fled their homeland and came to the United States and Canada to enrich those two countries, but to leave behind them a legacy of bitterness and unhappiness, which is still there today. When you go to witness the IRA support in the Irish communities of the east coast of this country, to recognize the legacy of bitterness towards the indifference and the normal contempt of the British government towards the poor of Ireland is a legacy which we're still feeling terribly today. So it's a complex and complicated world which we have to deal with. We do not have simple, discrete problems. They're all tangled up in politics and economics and socio-cultural considerations which we cannot even begin to fully understand, save with help. But they also provide for us great opportunities. It seems to me that over the next 10 or 15 years, as we reach out to the rest of the world, we will find that in trying to solve those problems, we will discover the very best that is in us. We will find that in serving other people, in losing our lives in their service, we actually find out who we are and what God expects us to do. I'm so grateful for this award. I'm so grateful that it bears Kennedy's name, for he is a role model, Dr. A.C. spoke of this morning, which can serve to guide all of us strive to serve the Master in helping others. Thank you. We invite you to remain and to finish dessert or enjoy table conversation as you can, but we realize some will need to be excused, and you're more than welcome to slip away as you need to. Thanks to one and all for being with us. Thank you.
As you're talking, this is all recorded on the tape. You may want to say something to Del Palmer.
How far does my hearing range extend? You're all right. Well, the acoustics are not bad. Let's begin. And if someone comes from the building staff and gets the power on while we're going, we'll just appreciate it that much more. My name is Stan Taylor. I, along with Dr. Spencer Palmer, direct the David M. Kennedy Center for International Studies on campus. We're happy and proud to host this session of the International Week activities. We have had a delightful day thus far. We've enjoyed Elder A.C.'s remarks at our devotional assembly. And at noon today, we had a very important, I think, and touching ceremony take place. Many of you have noticed that here in the room with us today is Elder David M. Kennedy, after whom our center was graciously named. And today at noon, Brother Kennedy, would you please stand so they can all see you? I know that he is uncomfortable with me talking about him as the kind of person he is, but he has been such a great help to us here in the center, and most of you know of his work in government, in a diplomatic career, and as a special representative for the First Presidency of the Church. But today, I was particularly touched when we gave the first annual David M. Kennedy International Service Award to Dr. Morrison, our guest speaker today. The citation, and even more, the response to that citation were very touching to me. So it's a very great deep privilege for me to be in the presence of both of these outstanding public servants. we welcome you to this session today to hear Dr. Morrison. I have asked Dr. Rita Edmonds, who is our coordinator of international internships, if she would give an opening prayer. And after that prayer, Dr. Palmer, the Associate Director of the Center, will introduce our guest.
Our Heavenly Father, we're grateful for this opportunity to gather together and hear the words of a man who has had the opportunity in his life to play an important leadership role in caring about the needs of others. We pray that as we listen to his words, that we may set goals for ourselves to develop the gospel principles in our life of love and service and being mindful of our neighbors and their needs. We've been blessed with so much, Heavenly Father, of the richness of this world, and we would like to have thy help in opening our minds to the possibilities of sharing this wealth and goodness with our brothers and sisters wherever they might be. We're grateful for the gospel of Jesus Christ, for the peace and the harmony that it can bring into our lives. Pray that thou will help us to live up to the values that we believe and that we espouse, so that we can have strength and confidence and integrity that comes from that will help us be of more use to others. We thank thee, Heavenly Father, for thy Son, his mission here to earth, and let's follow that example every day in our lives, and we say that we have to do something.
A few months ago, Deseret News, Church News section, highlighted Van Morrison as an exemplary Latter-day Saint, as an outstanding husband and father, married to Shirley Edith Brooks, with her parent of 8 children, one of whom I understand has graduated from BYU, and another, Jeffrey, who's halfway through his undergraduate degree in international relations, currently a missionary in Guam, Micronesia mission. It didn't give us full information about his credentials, his experiences, and his extraordinary concerns in the field of international health, and particularly health service among third world peoples. Brother Morrison received a BS degree with distinction from the University of Alberta, 1951, Master of Science from the University of Alberta in Animal Nutrition in 1952, his PhD from Cornell in Nutrition, Biochemistry, and Physiology, 1956, and another master's degree from the University of Michigan in Pharmacology in 1966. He has received a good number of 5 pages of awards here. I'll mention 2 or 3. In 1964, for example, he was certified as a specialist in human nutrition by the American Board of Nutrition. 69, he became a fellow of the Chemical Institute of Canada, and 73, a fellow of the Royal Society of Medicine. And in 1977, he received the Queen's Jubilee Medal. Brother Morrison has served as Assistant Deputy Minister of Health in the Health Protection Branch, 1972. His major current responsibilities is to the Deputy Minister, National Health and Welfare for the development and operation of a large and complex organization, Health Protection Branch, providing a national program designed to eliminate health hazards in the physical and social environments that lead to illness and untimely death among humans. His staff headquarters is located in Ottawa, and they have 5 major regional offices in Halifax, Montreal, Toronto, Winnipeg, and Vancouver. Among many other activities, this involves administering the Food and Drugs Act, the Narcotic Control Act, the Radiation Emitting Devices Act, and shared responsibility for the administration of the Environmental Contaminants Act with the Department of Consumer and Corporate Affairs for the Hazardous Products Act. Current resources of the program in which he is involved, something like $100 million, is that right? We're very honored and very gratified that the world has the skills and the concerns and the services of Brother Morrison, particularly to people who are in need of health and nutrition. And he's going to speak to us today, Health for All, the challenge to do better. It's my honor to introduce Brother Alexander B. Morrison.
Thank you very much, Professor Palmer, for those generous words of introduction. From time immemorial, mankind has recognized that good health is the fountainhead of all social progress, prerequisite for most worthwhile things in life. In its absence, individuals, communities, and nations are unable to live socially and economically satisfying lives. It is devoutly sought for and wished for by all mankind, and its importance is recognized by all peoples, regardless of culture, history, or geography. In one sense, recognition of the importance of health and the search for it is a unifying force, binding diverse peoples and cultures together. In other ways, however, the search for health, or more commonly attempts to escape from ill health, can be a divisive force, setting families, communities, or nations against each other. During the past century, inhabitants of the so-called developed countries have experienced steady gains in many indices of health, and now seem to take the right to a healthy lifestyle largely for granted. Infectious diseases, which a half-century ago were major killers in developed countries, have in the main been brought under control. A vast array of biomedical technology provides the basis for an enormous increase in the standard of physical care for the acutely ill. Life expectancy at birth has increased substantially. This is not, of course, to suggest that those who live in the developed countries are all healthy, nor that they have chosen styles of life conducive to and compatible with health. Even in the most advanced societies, now or in the future, complete well-being for all may be an unattainable dream, given the realities of human biology. For the vast majority of people living in the developing nations, however, the attainment of even reasonable standards of health and well-being is more the exception than the rule. It is perhaps not surprising, therefore, that the international community, acting through the World Health Organization, has placed primary emphasis on the achievement of health for all by the year 2000. Those who develop and implement national and international health policies are not so naive as to think that death, disease, and disability will be vanished from the world in less than 2 decades. The slogan, Health for All, is intended to convey the notion that by the end of this century, all peoples everywhere will have the opportunity to achieve and maintain reasonable standards of health and well-being. It is not intended to suggest that all will be healthy, but rather that all will have a reasonable chance to be so. It is, I think, important to consider how best to move from slogan to action, from rhetoric to results. The International Conference on Primary Health Care, held in the Russian city of Alma-Ata in 1978, issued a declaration that primary health care is the key to attaining health for all by the year 2000. It also identified 8 essential elements of primary health care. These are education concerning prevailing health problems and the methods of preventing and combating them, provision of an adequate food supply and promotion of proper nutrition, an adequate supply of safe water and basic sanitation, maternal and child health care, including family planning, immunization against the major infectious diseases, prevention and control of locally endemic disease, appropriate treatment of common diseases and injuries, and the provision of essential drugs. The concept of primary health care involves adoption of a broader context for health than the usual medical model, which is now widely recognized as providing a focus for activities which is much too narrow and myopic. The traditional view of the health field is that the art or science of medicine provides the headwaters from which all improvements in health have flowed. In essence, it equates the level of health with the quality of health care provided by physicians, nurses, other health professionals, and acute treatment hospitals. Adoption of the concept of primary health care, by contrast, requires that health be considered in relation to its contribution to and promotion of social and economic development, so that people can live socially and economically satisfying lives. Three critical aspects of primary health care must be noted. First of all, primary health care is not intended only for people of developing countries, but for all peoples everywhere, whatever their present level of social and economic development. Simple social justice, of course, demands that major efforts be placed on developing primary health care for the underprivileged peoples of the world. Secondly, each country must develop its own health policies in the light of its own unique health problems, social and economic realities, and political and administrative mechanisms. What is appropriate for a developed country, such as Canada, is highly unlikely to be appropriate for Sri Lanka or Burundi. Finally, the development and implementation of primary health care does not require tearing down existing healthcare systems, but rather building and expanding upon them. Primary health care must be seen as a community-based part of an integrated and comprehensive health system. Successful implementation of primary health care in developing countries is an immensely complex and difficult task, requiring painful attitudinal and behavioral changes, as well as the provision of physical resources and their effective utilization. The medical profession, for example, has a long tradition of curative medicine, but little experience or skill in developing community action. Good progress is being made in training new health professionals to accept new perspectives, but it takes time to make the conceptual change from medical care to health care. Entrenched attitudes of health professionals do not change overnight, particularly when those changes may involve a perceived loss in power and prestige. In development work in general, a monosectoral approach has been followed, when an intersectoral approach is what is needed. Information on health and disease must be available to and be used by those who manage intersectoral programs. Most of these are not health professionals. They are in finance departments, planning departments, and prime minister's offices. Countries are weakest in the intersectoral areas of primary health care, those aspects of socioeconomic development not directly related to the health sector, such as education, housing, the availability of clean water, transportation, or trade. The skills needed are primarily managerial in nature and are in very short supply in developing countries. Although there are obvious exceptions, physicians as a group are perhaps less than fully equipped to initiate and manage changes in complex interrelated systems, or even in some instances, to be fully committed to them. If there is one component necessary for the effective implementation of primary health care, which is lacking in developing countries, it is management. Systematic building up of the health infrastructures needed to deliver the programs, apply the technology, and instigate necessary social and behavioral measures requires careful planning and wide implementation. Management should not be equated with bureaucracy, though it often is. It must be tailor-made for the particular national circumstances involved. In most developing countries, only now emerging from a colonial past, good managers are in extremely short supply, and those that are available usually end up elsewhere than in health departments of national governments. Lack of community involvement can frustrate the best laid plans. For example, if a community is not committed to maintenance of proper waste disposal, it will not be long until the water supply is contaminated and water and foodborne diseases abound. Lack of community involvement and community commitment is common when solutions are imposed from the outside, regardless of how noble the motives are of those who do so. People in developing countries may not be educated by our standards, but they are not stupid. They have very good ideas about what is needed. They want help, but they resent dependence, and they do not appreciate being patronized. There are a great number of other constraints on the achievement of health for all in the developing part of the world. They include the following. First of all, the sheer size and scope of health problems. Hundreds of millions of people living in developing tropical countries are victims of a deadly triad of interconnected problems: disease, poverty, and ignorance. Those afflicted are cut off from the mainstream of social and economic progress, caught in a vicious cycle of poverty and sickness. People are poor because they are sick, and sick because they are poor. In addition to the diseases of the temperate climates, inhabitants of tropical countries bear the added burdens of afflictions which have been termed the root evils of tropical pathology. Most of these diseases are chronic infections, such as malaria, schistosomiasis, or filariasis, which may lead to early death, but invariably result in debilitation and intense chronic suffering. Their most frequent victims are children, but they affect every age of life and all of its aspects. They can disable an entire population, cause the abandonment of fertile and productive lands, and prevent the planting or harvesting of crops. In addition to their effects on health, tropical diseases have a marked inhibiting effect on social and economic development. Health and development are inextricably intertwined. Each influences and is influenced by the others. Healthy people are required for development, and development is needed to provide the financial and other resources on which improved health is based. Few statistics will illustrate the effects of all of this misery. The average life expectancy at birth is about 72 years in the developed countries of the North. It is about 55 years in developing countries of the South, and in Africa and Southeast Asia, it is only about 50 years. Of every 1,000 children born into poverty in the least developed countries, 200 will die within a year, another 100 die before the age of 5 years, and only 500 survive to age 40. Infant mortality rates are 10 to 20 times higher in developing countries than in those which may be termed developed. The World Health Organization has estimated that about a tenth of the life of an average person in a developing country is seriously disrupted by disease. The common infectious diseases of childhood, which have in the main been reduced to relatively minor problems in developed countries, continue to exact heavy toll in developing countries. Of the estimated 80 million children born each year in the developing countries, fewer than 10% are immunized against the common infectious diseases of childhood. Diarrheal diseases transmitted by fecal contamination of water, food, and soil are estimated to kill over 4 million children in developing countries each year. The total number of diarrheal episodes is estimated at 1,000 million annually. These statistics do not clearly indicate the disproportionate burden of disease which is borne by the rural and peri-urban poor. They are the ones who suffer the most and who receive the least attention from their governments, the unfortunate ones who represent the all in health for all. By contrast, the small numbers of urban rich who receive a disproportionate share of scarce resources tend to have disease patterns similar to their counterparts in developed countries. A second major problem is malnutrition. In many developing countries, malnutrition is the single most important public health problem. Although freedom from hunger has been defined as man's most fundamental right, the sad truth is that more than half the human race is either undernourished or frankly malnourished. Malnutrition saps energy and motivation and reduces performance in school and at work. Its occurrence in early childhood induces serious adverse effects on cognition and behavior. Malnutrition and infectious diseases are closely linked. A person who is undernourished is far more likely to succumb to an infectious disease than one who is well fed. Infectious diseases of childhood, such as measles or whooping cough, may precipitate acute malnutrition. For example, a child may develop measles and end up with measles and nutritional blindness. An episode of diarrhea in a young child may precipitate acute protein energy malnutrition. Furthermore, malnutrition reduces the body's resistance to infection. As a consequence, a common childhood disease such as measles, which is almost never the cause of death in well-nourished children of developed countries, may have a case fatality rate of 20% or more in developing countries. For every 100 children in Burundi, for example, who develop measles, at least 20 will die, maybe 30 or 40 will die. As usual, the burden of malnutrition falls most heavily on the poor. It's important to note the interactive relationships between malnutrition, infectious disease, and social disruption. Each acts on the others and is in turn acted upon. For example, the current famine that grasps sub-Saharan Africa in its grim embrace has resulted in many thousands of people fleeing tribal homelands in search of food and decent living conditions. They flood across national boundaries, causing wide-scale social disruption, as by sheer weight of numbers they overwhelm inadequate social support systems in the recipient countries. They accentuate already high levels of unemployment, competing with citizens of the host country for scarce jobs. Because they are culturally different from the inhabitants of the country to which they have fled, they may be ostracized or subjected to more severe expressions of prejudice, including forcible deportation, as occurred last year in Nigeria. They may introduce hitherto unknown forms of infectious disease or fall prey to diseases common in the host country, but against which they have no immunity. Their reaction to disease may in turn influence and be influenced by their nutritional status. This relationship between famine, disease, and social unrest is not, of course, a new phenomenon. It is as old as human history. A tragic example of its importance is afforded by the Irish potato famine of the 1840s, the Great Hunger, as Cecil Woodham Smith, one of its chroniclers, has called it. After blight had ravaged almost the entire Irish potato crop in the late summer of 1845, a crop on which the Irish peasantry almost totally depended for sustenance, a young English medical officer sent out to Ireland sensed impending doom. In October of that year, he wrote, quote, "Famine must be looked forward to, and then will follow, as a natural consequence, as in former years, typhus fever or some other malignant pestilence." How right he was. Although accurate figures have never been kept, it is reliably estimated that over 1 million Irish peasants died from famine and famine fever, as they spoke of the accompanying pestilence. And Irish history was forever changed by a great diaspora to the New World. Even today, there are fewer people in Ireland than there were in the 1840s. A third problem is clean water and sanitation. Perhaps the single action leading to greatest improvement in public health would be to provide a safe, regular water supply to inhabitants of the least developed countries. At present, only about 75% of city dwellers have a dependable access to reasonably safe and clean water and adequate sanitary facilities. In rural areas, fully 75% of the people lack ready access to clean water. They often have to walk 5 or 10 kilometers for water, bringing it back home in basins on their head or in jerry cans. The cost of providing facilities to provide clean water is estimated to be at least 30 to 50 billion US dollars each year until 1990, an amount which will be very hard to find, particularly since planning under the International Drinking Water Supply and Sanitation Decade envisages 2/3 coming from governments and 1/3 from donor countries and agencies. Investments on water and sanitation are in fact running at only about 10 billion US dollars annually, far short of the 30 to 50 billion dollars needed. A fourth problem is ineffective management by national governments. Health problems often are exacerbated by national governments who concentrate scarce health resources including essential pharmaceuticals and healthcare workers in urban areas, thus widening the gap between the rich and the poor. In many developing countries, national governments have inadequate political commitments to health, and health is relatively low on the list of national priorities. A few months ago, the Director General of the World Health Organization pointed out that although the majority of countries in Southeast Asia had endorsed the policy of health for all, only about 1/10 of them had made explicit resource allocations to implement a national strategy thereon. Less than a third of the countries in the region appear to know how much they're spending on health in general and on community-based primary health care in particular. Many health ministries are relatively weak and ineffective, with an inadequate capacity to plan, execute, and evaluate programs. They have inadequate health information systems to assist them in setting priorities and assessing progress, and inadequate numbers and kinds of personnel, including a lack of appropriate non-medical expertise. Development of national health policies, including linkage with other sectors contributing to health, is often deficient. The healthcare infrastructure is skewed towards satisfying the needs and wants of the small elite class, to the detriment of the health of the vast majority of people. Scarce health resources are over-concentrated in hospitals in large urban areas, to the neglect of rural and peri-urban areas. At the community level, chronic shortages of essential drugs, supplies, and equipment are common. It is not uncommon, for example, in Africa, to see a dispensary back in the bush which will not even have aspirin for 3 months out of the year. People will walk for 15 or 20 kilometers to come to that in sickness, carrying their sick children on their backs or in their arms, and arrive there and find that there isn't even an aspirin tablet to give to them. In the absence of literacy, it is extremely difficult to raise the standard of health. An ability to read and write enables people to understand their health problems and ways to solve them. Furthermore, it facilitates their involvement in the solution of problems at the household and community level. The adult literacy rate is, for practical purposes, nearly 100% in developed countries, but it's only 28% in the least developed countries. Given the important role which women play in health education within the home, it is particularly tragic to note that only approximately 13% of the women in the least developed countries are literate, and only 4 out of every 10 children in developing countries complete more than 3 years of primary school. The next problem, and perhaps the root cause of most of the problems just described, is poverty. Although the gross national product is by no means an ideal economic indicator, in general, the citizens of countries with a high GNP have high life expectancy and low infant mortality rates, and the reverse is true for countries with a low GNP. In most developed countries, the GNP varies from $5,000 to $10,000 US per year. In most developing countries, it is only from $200 to $1,000 US, and there are nearly a score of countries in Africa where the GNP is less than $200 per person per year. The President of the World Bank has recently stated that the average per capita income in the developing countries actually decreased in 1981 and 1982. In the face of enormous debt loads, many developing countries are cutting public spending, including that on health. In many developing countries, the absolute amounts of money available are simply inadequate. The expenditures on health in many developing countries amount to only a few dollars per capita per year. In the least developed countries, for example, data for 1980 showed an average of $1.70 US spent on health per capita per year. You can't do much with $1.70. In Upper Volta, which is perhaps the most miserable of all the countries in the world, there is an expenditure on health which amounts to less than 50 cents per person per year. Trends in population growth make the situation even more precarious. In 1980, the developing countries accounted for approximately 75% of the total world population, but by the year 2000, this figure will rise to approximately 80%. Nearly half of the people in the developing countries are under 15 years of age, and thus they are largely economically not productive, whereas approximately 23% are in the same age group in developed countries. The continuing trend towards urbanization indicates that by the year 2000, 12 of the 15 largest metropolitan areas in the world will be in the developing Projected demographic shifts and continuing urbanization will of course have important socioeconomic and health effects. Disease patterns will change and additional burdens will be placed on physical and social infrastructures, on food production and distribution systems, on housing, sanitation, water supplies, and health care. Another problem is that of political instability. In many developing countries, political coups follow each other with bewildering regularity, each regime promising to undo the evils of the past, only to fail in its turn, seduced by power and impotent to manage its effective application. The root causes of political instability in developing countries are complex. They include the continuing problems of tribalism, lack of experience in managing complex systems, corruption in high places, misplaced priorities which lead nations to buy jet fighter aircraft or build grandiose industrial projects while neglecting less spectacular but much more valuable agricultural projects, a mismatch between expectations and economic realities, and oppressive regimes of various political persuasions which deny civil rights by bloody methods until there is an inevitable result. To be realistic, however, political instability is not a new phenomenon, and it is not likely to be a short-lived one. To delay taking positive action to build the human potential of the people of the developing world until political stability as we know it in the West has been achieved is simply to guarantee that health for all will never become a reality. There are also problems and constraints on the achievement of health in developed countries. The first of those, and perhaps the most important, is poverty. Some of you may perhaps be surprised to find that even in the developed countries, poverty is still the biggest cause of ill health. Conversely, sickness is a significant cause of poverty. The current high levels of unemployment in many developed countries not only contribute to poverty, but they hit also at health. Poverty causes illness among all age groups: pregnant mothers, children, unemployed breadwinners, the aged. It contributes to poor housing and inadequate sanitation, to mental depression, suicide, violence, family discord, alcoholism, stress, malnutrition. It is a social and political problem of the highest order. A second constraint to the achievement of health in developed countries is what I call self-inflicted wounds, diseases of lifestyle. We know from work done by McEwen at the University of Birmingham Medical School in Britain that of all the factors impinging on the level of health in England and Wales in the 18th century, most of the improvements were due to modification of behavior and changes in the environment, and not to medical science at all. Lifestyle, for my purposes at least, may be defined, I think, as those decisions by individuals which affect their health and over which they have more or less control. It is characteristic of many people whose lifestyle is destructive of health that they look on the sunny side of risk and probability, sustaining themselves in the belief that bad things may happen to others but will not happen to them. Although in one sense these diseases of lifestyle are indeed self-inflicted wounds, in other ways those who suffer from them are victims, crippled by exploitation, lack of information, seductive advertising, and a generalized indifference towards the well-being of others, which results in people being characterized in purely economic terms. There are a whole series of destructive elements in the lifestyle of many inhabitants of developed countries. They include things as alcohol abuse, drug abuse, cigarette smoking. In fact, the smoking epidemic has spread dramatically now to the point where health authorities agree that smoking cigarettes represents the single largest preventable cause of early death. A 2-pack-a-day smoker in his early 30s has a life expectancy 8 to 9 years shorter than a non-smoker of the same age. Indeed, at any given age, life expectancy is significantly shortened by inhaling cigarette smoke. In Canada, for example, 29,000 deaths per year can be attributed to smoking cigarettes, and nearly 10 times that many in the United States. The cost in human suffering remains uncounted, but economic costs amount to at least $3.6 billion per year in my country. In Canada, approximately 80% of deaths from lung cancer, 22% of those from cardiovascular disease, and 77% of those from bronchitis and emphysema can be attributed to cigarette smoking. Mothers who smoke give birth to babies who are on average 200 grams lighter than babies of non-smoking mothers.
Children in households where one or more people smoke suffer more illness, including respiratory conditions, than children from non-smoking households. The tobacco industry on a worldwide basis spends billions of dollars annually on advertising its products, often using sporting and sexually enticing images. Effective action to slow and then reverse the smoking epidemic can occur only if the political will to take necessary strong action against cigarette manufacturers is present in national governments, and there is precious little evidence that such exists in most countries. A particularly tragic development regarding cigarette smoking is the extraordinary efforts now being made by the multinational tobacco industry to establish and expand markets in developing countries where widespread regular use of tobacco is not now traditional. Products sold there are often much higher in tar and nicotine levels than those sold in developed countries, and the advertising techniques used in Nigeria or Malaysia, for example, are blatantly exploitive and seductive, which have now been abandoned in most developed countries under pressure from health groups. Unless that trend can be reversed, and predict that we will see over the next quarter century a growing epidemic of tobacco-related disorders such as lung cancer and cardiovascular disease in countries of the third world, with all of the attendant suffering and economic costs. That's a tragic comment on human greed and human suffering. Violent injury and death is another problem in developed countries. Bad nutritional habits, still another. In terms of violent injury and death, you should know that amongst U.S. blacks, the leading cause of death in young males is homicide. In Europe, there are more than 100,000 suicides each year. The principal cause of death in people from age 5 to 35 is motor vehicle accidents. The second most important cause is other accidents, and the third is suicide. I won't, because there's not time, talk to you about environmental hazards which exist in developed countries. We all know that rapid industrialization, population growth, urbanization, increasing exploitation of natural resources, including fossil fuel products, accelerated technological change, are all having adverse effects on environmental quality, which in turn affects health. There's an over-reliance in the developed world on technology and a concern less about prevention and more about cure. The wonders of modern technology, exemplified in today's acute hospital care facility, put major emphasis on curative medicine to the neglect of prevention. That's not to say that developed countries should do away with their acute care hospitals and the associated high technology. Those facilities do provide the means to save lives, but though they stop people from dying, they don't add to health. By overemphasizing high-cost technology, we in effect divert resources away from the less dramatic work of preventing disease. For example, the wonders of the artificial heart, which are so well known in this state, may blind us to the ineluctable truth that this approach can never be applied except to a selected affluent minority. It will be for the vast majority of people, and it's a poor substitute for preventive measures which would ensure that it was not needed for place. But the fascination with technology and miracle cures is a living attitude of all kinds. What about the prospects for the future? I think despair sinking to a sea of Malthusian pessimism. I don't believe that that is warranted. It seems to me that if we will look at the task of trying to achieve health for all in its true light as a marathon race and not a sprint, which will be successfully run only if there is maximum commitment followed by maximum expenditure of effort over a sustained period of time, we can in fact goal of obtaining health for all. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Morrison. You've inspired us, you've informed us, and I hope that you've strengthened the commitment in each of us to find out more what we can do to help in these gigantic problems which you described. One of your last comments prompted a recollection in my mind of my recent trip to India. I was so dismayed to see the widespread public advertising of cigarette products. Just every place you would go, all you would see is advertising for cigarette products. Let me call your attention before you leave to other sessions in this International Week that are being held. Is anyone here who can help me do this? Let's see, Dr. Vetter, you're speaking tonight at 7:30. I think it's in this room. Is that correct? And at, when is Greg Newell? 4 o'clock in the ballroom. Greg Newell is the Assistant Secretary of State for International Organization. There are handouts describing all of the activities. Thank you, Professor Tobler, through the rate that I hope you will take advantage of. So thank you again, Dr. Morrison. We appreciate your being here. You honor your presence, and thank all of you for being here today.